Dare to Lead by BrenA Brown. Picture this, a conference green room, buzzing with nervous energy. 20 speakers are about to take the stage, and the air is practically crackling with ambition. Right in the middle of it all sits researcher BrenA Brown, and she's starting to have a full-blown panic attack. She peeks through the heavy velvet curtains and sees an ocean of dark suits. It looks like every executive in America decided to show up wearing navy blue. She turns to the super-energetic speaker standing next to her and whispers in horror, "Oh my God, these are all business people, like executives." He chuckles. "Yeah, mate, it's a conference for C-levels." The color drains from her face. CEOs, COOs, CFOs, and here she is, about to talk about shame. You know, that uncomfortable feeling of not being good enough. The speaker, this upbeat Australian guy named Pete, must have seen the sheer terror in her eyes, because he puts a gentle hand on her shoulder. Look out into that audience again. These are people. Just people. And no one talks to them about shame, even though every single one of them is drowning in it. Just like the rest of us. Look at them. They're people. That single moment, this simple reminder that people are just people, would completely redirect her career. And it's the perfect launching pad for our journey into one of the most influential leadership books of the past decade. Hello, and welcome. Today we're diving into BrenA Brown's absolute powerhouse of a book, Dare to Lead. This isn't some dusty business manual that's going to put you to sleep. This is a book that sold millions of copies and been embraced by leaders at places like Pixar, Microsoft, and even within the U.S. military. Why? Because it tackles a question that haunts literally everyone who's ever tried to lead anything, a team, a family, or even just their own chaotic life. How do you find the courage to show up when you're absolutely terrified of failing? BrenA Brown is a research professor who spent 20 years studying the exact things we all try to hide: vulnerability, shame, and fear. Her TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability, is one of the most watched talks of all time, racking up tens of millions of views. She didn't wake up one day and decide to become a leadership guru. She set out to understand what it actually means to be human. And what she discovered is that the heart of great leadership isn't about power, status, or having all the answers. It's about having the courage to be vulnerable. By the end of our time together, you'll understand the 4 simple, teachable skills that make up courage. You'll discover that bravery isn't some personality trait you're either born with or not. It's a practice. Something you can actually get better at. And you'll have a roadmap for handling tough conversations, building unbreakable trust, and getting back up after you fall, stronger than before. Think of this as your playbook for becoming a daring leader. So let's dive in. So what does it really mean to be a leader? We usually picture someone with a fancy title and a corner office. A person who commands every room with unshakable confidence. But BrenA Brown offers a much simpler and way more powerful definition. She says a leader is anyone who takes responsibility for finding the potential in people and processes, and has the courage to develop that potential. By that definition, you're probably already a leader. Whether you're the captain of your soccer team, running a school project, or just the person your friends turn to when things get messy. The call to lead is really just a call to be brave. But here's where things get interesting. When she interviewed over 150 senior leaders from around the world, CEOs, generals, nonprofit directors, and asked them, what needs to change about leadership today? The answer was unanimous. We need braver leaders. But when she pushed them further and asked, okay, so what exactly are the skills of brave leadership? What does it actually look like? They went completely silent. Most of them couldn't name the specific behaviors. What they could do, though, was passionately list everything that gets in the way. Things like dodging tough conversations, refusing to give honest feedback because it feels uncomfortable, a complete lack of trust, being terrified of taking risks, throwing others under the bus when things go wrong. It became crystal clear that we don't really have a leadership problem, we have a courage problem. And our courage problem is actually a vulnerability problem. This is the beating heart of the book, the one sentence that changes everything. You can't get to courage without rumbling with vulnerability. Now let's pause on that word for a second. Vulnerability. For most of us, it's a word that makes us want to crawl under a table. It sounds like weakness, like oversharing your feelings or ugly crying in the office. But that's completely wrong. Brene defines vulnerability as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. Think about it. Can you name a single example of courage, in your life or in all of history, that didn't require someone to face uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure? She's asked this question to everyone, from Special Forces soldiers to fighter pilots to Fortune 500 CEOs. And literally no one has ever been able to name one. Not a single example. Courage and vulnerability aren't two different things. They're two sides of the same coin. The courage to ask someone on a first date. The courage to give honest feedback to a friend. The courage to try out for a team when you're not sure you'll make it. The courage to raise your hand in class and admit, I have no idea what's going on. All of that is vulnerability. It's not about winning or losing. It's having the guts to show up and be seen when you can't control what happens next. And because it feels so incredibly risky, our natural instinct is to protect ourselves. We build armor. This armor isn't made of steel. It's made of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. It's the armor that keeps us from ever having to feel vulnerable. And this is where most leaders, and honestly most of us, get it completely wrong. We spend our entire lives polishing our armor, convinced it's keeping us safe, when in reality, it's keeping us small. It's blocking us from connecting with people, from taking risks, and from being the brave leaders we're meant to be. Brene identifies 16 types of this leadership armor, but let's talk about a few of the heavy hitters. The first one we all know intimately: perfectionism. Perfectionism isn't about wanting to do your best. That's healthy. Perfectionism is the belief that if we do everything perfectly, if we look perfect and act perfect, we can somehow avoid the pain of blame, judgment, and shame. It's like dragging around a 20-ton shield, thinking it's protecting us, when really it's just preventing anyone from ever truly seeing who we are. It's a hustle. And it's always focused on one question: what will people think? Another piece of armor is numbing. We all have our favorite numbing agents: food, social media, video games, staying ridiculously busy, working constantly. Whenever we feel that uncomfortable edge of anxiety or disappointment creeping in, we reach for something to make it disappear. The problem is, you can't selectively numb emotion. When you numb the dark stuff, you also numb the light. When you numb pain, you're also numbing joy, love, and genuine connection. And maybe the most common armor of all? Being a knower, and always being right. This is that desperate need to have all the answers, to never look stupid. The knower is always posturing, always defending. This armor absolutely kills curiosity. It shuts down our ability to learn anything new. Because if your job is to be right all the time, you can't ever afford to be wrong. And if you can't be wrong, you can't learn. So if this is the armor we're all wearing, how do we actually take it off? How do we find the courage to show up without it? BrenA Brown's research uncovered that daring leadership is made up of 4 skill sets, just 4. And here's the incredible part. They can be taught, observed, and measured. Courage isn't a personality trait you're born with. It's a skill you develop. And these are the 4 skills. The first one, which is the foundation for everything else, is rumbling with vulnerability. A rumble is her term for a conversation, meeting, or discussion where everyone commits to leaning into discomfort, staying curious, and owning their part. It's about having the tough conversations instead of running away from them. And the essential mantra for this skill is beautifully simple. Clear is kind. Unclear is unkind. Think about how many times we've avoided giving direct feedback because we didn't want to hurt someone's feelings. We tell ourselves we're being nice. But are we really? Is it kind to let a teammate keep making the same mistake because you're too uncomfortable to say something? Is it kind to be vague about your expectations and then get frustrated when they don't magically read your mind? No, that's actually unkind. Feeding people half-truths to make them feel better is almost always really about making ourselves feel better. Brene learned this the hard way. She tells this story about how her leadership team had to sit her down for a serious rumble. Her CFO, this guy named Chaz, looked at her and said, "We keep setting these completely unrealistic timelines, working like maniacs to meet them, and then failing anyway. People are burning out. When you set a timeline and we push back, you get so insistent that we just stop pushing. It's not working." Her first instinct was to shut down, to say, "Okay, I get it, I'll work on it," just to make the awkwardness stop. It was painful, it was uncomfortable. But she leaned into her own teaching. She got curious. She asked, "Tell me more." And as she listened, she realized her impossible timelines weren't driven by ambition at all. They were driven by fear. The fear that they weren't doing enough, that someone else was going to beat them to an idea. Instead of being honest about that fear and talking about it, she was dumping her anxiety onto her team in the form of ridiculous deadlines. By having that rumble, they created new systems together, but more importantly, they built deeper trust. She showed them she was willing to be vulnerable, to own her mistakes, and to actually change. That's what rumbling is all about. It's about choosing courage over comfort. Maybe one of the most moving stories in the book about this skill comes from a U.S. Air Force colonel named Dede Halfhill. Dede was speaking to a group of about 40 airmen. At the end of her presentation, a young guy raised his hand and asked, "Ma'am, when is the pace of operations going to slow down? Because we're really tired." Dede could have given the standard leadership response, something about mission readiness or national security. But instead, she chose to rumble. She said, "I hear you. Leaders across the Air Force know you're tired." And then she did something incredibly brave. She said, "I want to share something I read recently. An organization was studying companies with really high levels of exhaustion, and they found something surprising. It wasn't just the workload making people exhausted. The employees were exhausted because they were lonely. Loneliness actually shows up as exhaustion." She paused, then looked out at the group. "So if I were to ask you, instead of who's tired, who's lonely, how many of you would raise your hand?" 15 hands shot up, nearly half the room. She was completely shocked. Her first thought was, "I'm not a therapist. I have no idea what to do with this." She wanted to change the subject, to escape the discomfort. But she didn't. She held the space. She looked at them and said, "Honestly, this breaks my heart. And seeing so many of you raise your hands scares me a little, because I'm not entirely sure what to do. If you tell me you're tired, I tell you to get some rest. But if you're lonely, and I send you off to be by yourself, I could be making the problem even worse." That one vulnerable question opened the door to a real conversation. They talked about connection, about inclusion, about how to actually build community. She didn't have the perfect answers, but by naming the real problem, not exhaustion, but loneliness, she showed them they weren't alone. She chose to connect with them in their struggle instead of trying to fix it from a distance. That's the essence of rumbling with vulnerability. The second skill of daring leadership is living into our values. Imagine you're standing in an arena. The crowd is roaring. Critics are shouting from the cheap seats. It's loud. It's chaotic. And it's incredibly easy to get distracted. It's easy to forget why you even stepped into that arena in the first place. Your values are your North Star. They're the light that guides you when everything gets dark. They're the reason you're in the arena to begin with. But here's the catch. We can't live into values we can't name. Brene argues that we should be able to identify our 2 core values. Just 2, not 10 or 15. Because if you have more than 3 priorities, you actually have no priorities at all. She provides this long list of values, words like authenticity, compassion, family, faith, integrity, success, justice. The challenge is to narrow it down to the 2 that define who you are at your absolute best. The 2 that act as a filter for your hardest decisions. For Brene, her 2 values are faith and courage. At first, she hated not picking family. Her family is the most important thing in her life. But as she dug deeper, she realized her commitment to her family is actually fueled by her faith and courage. It takes courage for her to say no to a work trip so she can be home for her kids. Her faith reminds her that if she does what's right, other opportunities will come. But naming your values is just step 1. The real work comes in step 2, taking your values from nice-sounding words to actual behaviors. For each of your 2 values, you have to answer 3 questions. What are 3 behaviors that support this value? What are 3 slippery behaviors that fall outside this value? And what's an example of a time when I was fully living this value? This is what she calls operationalizing your values. For example, if one of your values is respect, what does that actually look like in practice? Does it mean listening without interrupting? Does it mean not talking about people behind their backs? Does it mean valuing others' time by showing up when you say you will? When you can define the behaviors, you can actually practice them, and you can hold yourself and others accountable. Living into our values means we practice what we preach. And here's the key. Daring leaders who live into their values are never silent about hard things. This leads us to the third skill, braving trust. Trust. It's the glue that holds teams, families, and entire organizations together. And talking about it can feel like walking through an emotional minefield. We all want to be seen as trustworthy, but we're often super hesitant to trust others. The problem is we talk about trust as this big monolithic thing. I don't trust you. Where do you even go from there? It feels like a personal attack with nowhere to land. So Brene and her team broke it down into pieces. They asked, what is trust really? What are the specific observable behaviors that actually build it? They came up with an acronym, BRAVING. Each letter stands for one of the 7 elements of trust. The Braving Inventory is a tool to help us get specific and have productive conversations instead of vague accusations. Let's walk through it. B is for boundaries. You respect my boundaries, and when you're not clear about something, you actually ask. You're willing to say no. Generous people, it turns out, have the clearest boundaries. R is for reliability. You do what you say you're going to do, over and over again. This means you don't overpromise, and you're aware of your own limitations. A is for accountability. You own your mistakes, you apologize for them, and you make genuine amends. V is for vault. This one is subtle but powerful. The vault means you don't share information that isn't yours to share. It's about confidentiality. But it's a two-way street. It doesn't just mean that my secrets are safe with you, it also means you don't come to me constantly sharing other people's secrets. If someone is always gossiping to you, you can't trust that they're not gossiping about you when you're not around. I is for integrity. This is about choosing courage over comfort. It's choosing what's right over what's fun, fast, or easy. And it's actually practicing your values, not just professing them. N is for non-judgment. I can ask for what I need, and you can ask for what you need. We can talk about how we're feeling without being judged. And, this is huge, we can ask for help. In fact, her research with leaders found that the single most common behavior that earns their trust is watching people ask for help. Leaders don't give the most important projects to people who act like they know everything. They give them to people they trust to raise their hand and say, "I'm stuck," before things spiral completely out of control. And finally, G is for generosity. You extend the most generous interpretation possible to the intentions, words, and actions of others. In other words, you assume positive intent. You assume people are doing the best they can with what they have. These 7 behaviors are the anatomy of trust. They take this big, scary concept and turn it into something we can actually talk about, practice, and build, one small moment at a time. This brings us back to one of the most important lessons in the book, which she illustrates with her marble jar story. When her daughter Ellen was in 3rd grade, she came home from school absolutely devastated. She had shared a secret with her friends, and by the end of the day, the entire class knew about it. She looked at her mom with tears streaming down her face and said, "I will never trust anyone again." Instead of agreeing with her, Brene told her about the marble jar. She said, "Trust is like a marble jar. Every time someone is kind to you or keeps a secret or sticks up for you, you put a marble in their jar. And when people are mean or break a promise, marbles come out. You share your secrets with the people who, over time, have filled up their jar." The lesson is profound. Trust isn't built in big, heroic moments. It's built in tiny, everyday moments. It's a friend remembering your parents' names. It's a colleague making room for you at the lunch table. It's the slow, steady accumulation of marbles, one small act of integrity at a time. This brings us to the 4th and final skill set of daring leadership, learning to rise. If you're going to be brave in your life, you are absolutely going to fall. You will fail. You will get your heart broken. You will have setbacks. That's not a maybe, it's a guarantee. That's literally why we call it courage. And if we don't teach people how to get back up, they'll eventually stop taking risks altogether. Leaders who are trained in rising skills before they fall are far more likely to be brave in the first place. So how do we do it? The Learning to Rise process has 3 steps: the reckoning, the rumble, and the revolution. And the best way to understand it is through a story she tells about ham. She calls it the ham fold-over debacle. A few years ago, she was completely drowning. She was launching a new company and a new book at the exact same time. Her dining room looked like a paper tornado had hit it. She was on the verge of tears when her husband Steve came home from work. He walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and said, "We don't even have any damn lunch meat in this house." That one sentence sent her completely over the edge. Her internal story started playing instantly. "He's so ungrateful. I'm drowning here, and all he can think about is ham? He's basically telling me what a failure I am right now." This brings us to step 1, the reckoning. The reckoning is simply recognizing that you're emotionally hooked. Something's got you. You feel it in your body. The clenched jaw, the tight fists, the knot forming in your stomach. Instead of immediately acting on that emotion, you pause and get curious. But Brene didn't pause. She marched into the kitchen and unleashed an absolute torrent of sarcasm about how he could take his big truck and drive himself to the grocery store and buy his own damn ham. The fight escalated until Steve, looking completely confused, stopped her and asked, "What's really going on here?" This is where the magic happens. Instead of doubling down on her anger, she used the single most powerful tool from the entire book. She said, "The story I'm telling myself right now is this." This phrase is an absolute game changer. It allows you to own your feelings and your narrative without presenting them as undeniable facts. She told him, "The story I'm telling myself is that I'm a half-ass leader, a half-ass mom, a half-ass wife. I'm disappointing every single person in my life. And what I'm making up is that you walked in here and wanted to make absolutely sure that I knew how badly things suck right now." This leads to step 2, the rumble. The rumble is where you get brutally honest about the story you're making up, your shitty first draft, as she lovingly calls it. In the absence of actual data, our brains will always make up stories to make sense of the world. And those first stories are almost always written entirely by our fear and our deepest insecurities. By sharing her story with Steve, she gave him a window into her world. And he didn't try to fix it or argue with it. He met her with pure empathy. He said, "What? I get it. You're so far underwater right now, you can't even find your way to the surface. I'm diving down. I'm going to find you, and I'm going to pull you up." They connected. The fight dissolved completely. But she was still curious. She asked him, "But why the big proclamation about the ham? Was it kind of a dig at me?" He thought for a moment and said, "I was just so hungry. I got stuck with a patient during lunch and didn't eat anything. On the way home, all I could think was, I'm going to make myself a ham fold over." That's it. His comment had absolutely nothing to do with her. It had everything to do with him being hungry. Her fear and overwhelm had made her the center of a story that wasn't even about her. This is the rumble. It's challenging all the conspiracies and wild stories we create in our heads and asking, what do I actually know for sure? What assumptions am I making? And what's my part in all of this? The difference between her shitty first draft, Steve thinks I'm a complete failure, and the truth, Steve was hungry, is what she calls the delta. And in that delta is where all the wisdom and learning lives, which leads to the final step, the revolution. The revolution is what happens when we integrate these learnings into our actual lives. It's when we take what we learned from our fall and use it to rise stronger. When we have the courage to walk into our story and own it, we get to write the ending. When we deny our stories of failure and hurt, they own us instead. For Brene, the ham debacle became a powerful moment of revolution. She learned that when she's overwhelmed, she's incredibly quick to blame herself. She learned she needs to get way better at asking for help before she hits the breaking point. And she owned the fact that she sometimes dumps her hurt onto other people as anger. That messy kitchen confrontation became a story of connection, trust, and real growth. This is the work. It's not easy. It's the practice of reckoning with our emotions, rumbling with our stories, and writing new, braver endings. These 4 skills, rumbling with vulnerability, living into our values, braving trust, and learning to rise, aren't separate. They're deeply woven together. You can't live into your values if you're not willing to have the vulnerable conversations that integrity requires. You can't build trust if you can't get back up after that trust gets broken. This is the revolution. It's choosing authenticity over approval. It's choosing courage over comfort. It's choosing whole hearts over armor. It's the choice to dare to lead. So what do we actually take away from all of this? When you first hear these ideas, it's pretty easy to think they're soft. Vulnerability, empathy, feelings. It's tempting to dismiss them as things that don't belong in the real world of hard deadlines and bottom lines. But as BrenA Brown loves to say, if you want to call these soft skills after you've actually tried putting them into practice, go for it. I dare you. Because the truth is, this is the hardest work there is. It's far easier to hide behind armor, to blame other people, to avoid the tough conversations. It is much, much harder to show up, to let yourself be seen, and to lead from your heart. What makes Dare to Lead so powerful, especially in this moment, is that it gives us a practical language for this incredibly hard work. It takes abstract concepts like courage and trust and breaks them down into skills we can actually practice. It gives us permission to be human, and it shows us that our humanity isn't a liability in leadership. It's our greatest asset. In a world that feels increasingly divided and cynical, where it's so easy to stay in our echo chambers and talk about people instead of to them, this book is a call to rebellion. It's a rebellion against fear, a rebellion against armor. It's a quiet revolution that starts with a single choice, the choice to be brave. So how can you start putting this into practice right now, today? Here are 3 simple but powerful actions you can take. First, do the square squad exercise. Take out a tiny 1-inch by 1-inch piece of paper. On it, write down the names of the people whose opinions of you truly matter. The people who love you not despite your imperfections, but because of them. These are the people in the arena with you. This tiny piece of paper becomes your shield against all the critics shouting from the cheap seats. It's a reminder of who you're really accountable to. Second, try using the magic phrase, the story I'm telling myself is. The next time you feel that spark of anger or misunderstanding with a friend, a parent, or a teacher, instead of immediately reacting, try starting the conversation that way. The story I'm telling myself is that you're disappointed in me. It's a disarming, honest, and incredibly brave way to open a real conversation instead of starting a fight. Third, get curious about your 2 core values. You don't have to figure them out tonight, but just start the process. Look at a list of values and circle the ones that genuinely resonate with you. Start asking yourself, what truly matters to me? What beliefs guide me when I'm at my absolute best? Knowing your values is like having a compass in the wilderness. It won't make the path easy, but it will always show you the way home. That was a deep dive into Dare to Lead by BrenA Brown. We've covered the core ideas today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary can only ever be a map. The real treasure is found on the actual journey. The real magic happens when you read the book yourself. It's in those quiet moments, when a particular story or a simple phrase hits you in a way you didn't expect. This summary is designed to help you decide if this book is worth your time. If anything we've talked about today has resonated with you, I really encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning. It's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see yourself, your relationships, and your own capacity to be brave. Also, if you found this summary valuable, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book. Let's keep growing together.